Hi guys, it's Reagan and welcome back to another video. Today's video is always one of my favorite videos to film, and that is the mid-year freakout tag. I honestly cannot believe we are already just about halfway through the year, which means I'm going to be taking a look at all of the books I have read, from my favorites to my least favorites, from the ones I haven't gotten to yet, and share my thoughts and feelings with you guys today. This is a tag. I'll have the questions linked down below in my description box, as well as the original creator. But without further ado, let's go ahead and dive right into the book. So the questions start out swinging, and that is to talk about your favorite book of the year so far. This was pretty hard to narrow down, as I have read quite a few fantastic sequels this year, but I would say my favorite book that's not included on other questions is My Brilliant Friend by Elena Ferrante. This book honestly just captivated me from book one. I found the narrative style to be so engrossing. Just the intensity of the narrative and just the hyper focus on this female friendship, just honestly, I loved it immediately. But this is a story that centers on two girls, Elena and Lila. The story itself is told from Elena's point of view, and it basically follows them from their early childhood up through high school. This is a story about their friendship and kind of documenting different chapters of their lives, and often very much centers education, as one of the girls, Elena, was able to go to school and Lila was not. These two girls are incredibly close. Their relationship is also dynamic. You see their love for each other, you see the solace they find in one another, but you also see the jealousy, the frustration. But ultimately, at the end of the day, they are each other's person that they know understands them the most. This book is set in the 50s in Naples, Italy. The lives of these two young girls are not easy. They live in a very violent and very intense place, but through their lives, we also see the story of a community, of a country, and of a specific time period. This book was incredible for a book that's really about life. It's a very slice of life story. Just the pacing and how everything is introduced just completely grips you. I loved this book. I will for sure be checking out other books in this quartet later on this year, and I also want to watch the TV show, but the first book was just as amazing as I hoped, and I went into this with incredibly high expectations, and it completely exceeded them. The next question is, what is the best sequel you read this year? And I was able to narrow this down to two books, and the first one is The Hod King by Josiah Bancroft. This is probably my favorite book within the Senlin Ascend series, which is one of my all-time favorite fantasy series out there. It's just so unique and so interesting, and the third book to me was just the best of a bunch of fantastic books, so this had to be selected for this question. I have talked about this series almost ad nauseum, but this follows our main character Senlin, and at the beginning of book one, he's traveling to this very mythical place called the Tower of Babel, which is full of thousands of floors, countless amounts of people, and all in all, it's very much a mystery and also his dream to explore it. He travels there to go on his honeymoon with his new wife, but upon their arrival, they are separated, and so begins an adventure, a journey through the bowels of this tower, following Senlin and also a large cast of characters kind of seeking out what they've lost. The series is genius, from the writing to just the overall ideas, and the intensity of book three was just incredible, and how it was able to pivot between these different groups of points of view. I love this series because while you, yes, love Senlin, you also fall in love with so many different characters as well. I loved The Hod King. I also really enjoyed the fourth and final book, but as I said, this is my favorite within the series. And then I also have to mention Before They Were Hanged by Joe Abercrombie. I loved this book, and I just love this series, and I can't wait to read more Joe Abercrombie as well. This sequel within this fantasy trilogy just really cracked open the plot. It was so fast-paced, so much stuff happened. The first one was really character-focused, kind of just focusing on setting the pieces, but in book two, we really got to begin to experience a lot of that payoff we've all been waiting for. But the First Law series is a multi-POV tale that is grim dark. All of the characters are incredibly flawed, very dynamic, but you will fall in love with all of them in a very confusing way. Like, my favorite character tortures people for a living. I'm not kidding. In the beginning of book one, you're kind of introduced to them and their different lives, their different roles, their different jobs, and slowly through a variety of complex political scenarios, they're kind of brought together. And in book two, let's just say an adventure breaks out from there. It's snarky, it's dark, it's violent, it's intense. I loved seeing where everyone got to in this one and truly cannot wait to read what happens next. Next up is name a new release that you haven't gotten to yet but really, really want to. I have 2 books for this. The first I haven't even shown off yet at all, and that is Ordinary Monsters by J.M. Moreau. This is one of my most anticipated releases of the year. I saw it on vacation, picked it up because I just can't wait to have it in my hands. This, I'm hoping, is gonna give me like everything I wanted Jonathan Strange to give me, but didn't. This is set in London in 1882, and 2 children with mysterious powers are hunted by a figure of darkness, a man made of smoke. But this is a work of historical fantasy and kind of introduces readers to a dark and mysterious world full of magic and all sorts of danger. I love historical fantasy. I think it's just one of the best intersections of 2 genres I love. I want this to be vibey, full of historical references, but also some dark and mysterious magic. It's long. I feel like this could be a perfect fall read, so I'm kind of holding on to it, but we'll see how good my willpower is. And then the next book I literally just bought and showed off in my most recent book haul, and that is When Women Were Dragons by Kelly Barnhill. This is a speculative fiction novel with a fantastical element. It's basically set in 1950s in a world that is basically exactly like our own, except for one very significant event. And that is one night, a group of women were basically transformed into dragons. They grew wings, they grew scales, and they left a fiery path of destruction and took to the skies. And this is a story about not just that event, also about the women who were left behind and also the consequences of this dragon event. I think the 1950s setting could be really interesting, and with this fantastical twist, I'm just really curious where Kelly Barnhill is going to take it. I really enjoy her writing as I have read her middle grade, but I don't know, everything about this just sounded really interesting to me, and I feel like it could be a new favorite as well. Next question is your most anticipated release of the second half of the year. True classic fashion, I could not narrow this down to just one title. I have 3, but I will be quick. The first honestly should be no surprise, and I'm sure is on many other people's lists, and that is Babel by R.F. Kuang. Outside of R.F. Kuang being one of my favorite fantasy writers, I loved the Poppy War series. It was gruesome, it was fantastic, it was emotional. This book's synopsis and just the second part of the title just truly sounds so cool, and I know R.F. Kuang has spoken that she's really going to be diving in to a lot of the problematic areas of academia and is going to really crack that open in a fantasy setting. But this is Babel, or the necessity of violence of arcane history of the Oxford Translators Revolution. We follow a character who basically is a really good translator. He's brought into this secret society. I think this book specifically is going to be challenging translations, challenging history, and this narrative of histories written by the victors. It's going to be focusing on student revolutions, colonization, and imperialism. I think it's going to be spectacular. Then I also have The Daughter of Dr. Moreau by Silvia Moreno Garcia, one of my all-time favorite authors. I have read many of her books, so needless to say, with her new release coming out very, very soon, it is high on my list to pick up and read right away. And specifically, this is a reimagining of the island of Dr. Moreau, but set in the backdrop of Mexico City in the 19th century. I already know I love her writing. I already know I love her historical reimaginings. I feel like this is going to be full of magic and a darkness, and I cannot wait to read this book. And then lastly, another really big release for the year is Carrie Soto is Back by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I really enjoy Taylor Jenkins Reid's writing. I honestly always feel like her releases sneak up on me, but this one is on my radar. I'm curious to check it out. I'm sure many other people will be reading and reviewing it, so I'm curious to know what I think. I also feel like I'm probably going to read this on audio, but this, I believe, is a story that centers the greatness of a legendary female tennis athlete and a setting where the world thinks she's past her prime, and I think it kind of centers her story and also her dedication to the sport. I'm curious about this. Tennis has been present in some other books by this author, so I'm curious to see it kind of centered in the spotlight. She has a way with kind of making topics I otherwise don't think I'd be so interested in be really cool and really attaching such a human side to it. This for sure is pre-ordered, and I'm curious to pick it up. All right, the next set of books are the most disappointing reads I've read so far this year. A little less positive, and unfortunately, I feel like I've had quite a few books kind of let me down a bit. The first is another recent read, and that is Book of Night by Holly Black. This was a book I was so excited for, as this was Holly Black's debut adult fantasy release, kind of centering shadow magic. It almost seemed seemed to hint at like kind of a new way to look at vampires. Overall, this book was dull. It just did not have like the beautiful writing or just the entrancing plotting I was expecting from an author I otherwise really enjoy. It was a big letdown. And the other should also be no surprise. I have a reading vlog about this entire experience, and that is House of Breath and Sky by Sarah J. Maas. I just wanted a good bit of escapism when I picked this book up. I wanted a good time. I wasn't even trying to be picky, but this book really tested me, my sanity, and overall my desire to even like reading. I detested this book pretty much in every way, shape, and form, and I also detest the fact that I will still pick up the third one because the last 10 pages really hooked me, and I resent that too. The next question is the biggest surprise of the year so far, and for that I'm picking Atlas 6 by Olivia Blake. Honestly, I'm not gonna lie, when I picked this book up, I really was expecting to not like it. It's not that I went in intentionally with that point of view, I just assumed it wasn't going to live up to all of the hype it receives across so many different social media platforms. I really thought it was just going to be okay. Honestly, this book really gripped me. I found it incredibly entertaining. I loved the dark, moody, academic atmosphere. I loved the large cast of characters. I loved that everyone's motivations were really murky. I loved all the gray morality. I loved that no one was truly that likable. I honestly felt like everything really worked so well in this sort of dark academia fantasy space that is a genre that I personally really enjoy, but this is a story that follows a secret society, and 6 candidates are invited to try out for it every 10 years or so. The reason why each candidate accepts this invitation is kind of personal to them, but when they arrive, they all begin kind of competing against each other for one of these spots because the person who does not make it dies. What I already alluded to is that this book actually has points of view for each of these candidates plus other characters. This I felt like was incredibly successful in the way that there was no clear main character, so the tension on who's going to make it, who's going to work with who, really existed throughout the entire book, not to mention just watching geniuses kind of test the limits of their own magical abilities was cool and fun and entertaining. I can't wait for the sequel to come out later this year. I personally felt like this book really worked for me, and I liked it a lot. Next is favorite author, either debut or new to you, and for me, I had to pick Juliette Marillier. I feel like Juliette Marillier is going to become like on possibly the same plane for me as Robin Hobb. I've only read one book by her, but sometimes when you encounter a story and when you look at all of the pieces and you kind of look at the rest of the books that they have out, you quickly realize that this author might just very well become one of your favorite authors, and that's how I felt with Juliette Marillier. I love Daughter of the Forest. It was emotional, it was lyrical, honestly like cottagecore fantasy to a T. The nature settings, the quests, just everything about it I love. This was a 5-star read for me, but also just looking at all of her other stories, which still continues to center female characters and nature, other folklore leading stories. I just really feel like I'm going to love all of her books, and I can't wait to continue my journey with reading her stories because I loved her writing in this book so much. Next is your newest fictional crush, and for that I went with Sir Conrad von Volt in The Justice of Kings. This is another kind of debut fantasy novel that really caught me by surprise. Just the structure of the story, the writing style of the story, and the plot of the story was so cool, and I also felt like a really original approach to fantasy. This is kind of like a thriller in a fantasy setting, and it basically follows one of our main characters, Sir Conrad von Volt, who is a justice, and in this world he has the power to be both the judge, executioner, and investigator for different crimes across the land, but the story itself is not told from his point of view, but in fact his young apprentice. And in this first book, we're investigating a case that kind of acts in some ways as a spark to like this larger political turmoil that's going to continue to result in later installments. But anyway, back to my fictional crush. Sir Conrad von Volt is smooth, he's smart, he's patient, and our main character kind of has a crush on him, and I feel like that really rubbed off on me because I kind of had a crush on him by the end of the book. He's got it figured out. I like his vibe, I like his aura, and I feel like he was very crush worthy in my point of view. Next up is favorite new character, and for that I'm selecting the entire cast from If I Had Your Face by Frances Cha. This is another slice of life story centering a group of young girls who all live either with each other or around each other in the same building, Seoul, South Korea. This is a multi-POV story, really unpacking things like impossible beauty standards, plastic surgery, sexism, classism, and you experience different realities of this through different chapters following one of these different girls. And their stories just really move you. They are incredibly dynamic and very flawed in a lot of ways. And what's so great about the story is the author just kind of drops you in, and then you just kind of leave. But by the end of the book, you are rooting for all of these girls. You feel so connected to their lives, and you can really begin to understand how and why they've made some of the decisions they've made. You're also rooting for them to make perhaps better decisions or more fruitful decisions for themselves in the future. But at the end of the day, you see their worth and also who they are. And I honestly thought it was just so beautifully done. It is like a slice of life coming of age story for all of these young women. And I just fell in love with all of them for different reasons. And I think about them from time to time. Like, I know they're fake, but I'm constantly just like, I hope they're doing well. I hope everything's okay, because that's really how I felt when I finished this book. It was so good and really made me think. I loved this book and I loved all of the characters within it. Next up is a book that made you cry, and I think so far this year there's only one book that made me cry, and it was not like cute single tear running down my face. I ugly cried reading this book, so I will say it did leave quite the emotional impact, and that is Beartown by Frederick Bachman. This is another multi-POV book that very much centers community. Specifically, this is set in the town called Beartown, which is a small, remote town in the countryside of Sweden. Here, hockey is king. Not only is it everyone's favorite pastime, but in a lot of ways, it brings a lot of business and opportunity for this town. And Beartown has not really been good at anything for a long time, but the junior ice hockey team has been doing incredibly well and are actually in the semifinals. But under the heavy burden of this semifinal match, a young girl is left traumatized and the entire town is in turmoil. Again, I would say this is very much a story about community. There are so many different perspectives, and each paragraph almost bleeds into a new point of view. We're following such a huge variety of characters, from many members of the junior ice hockey team to the coach of the hockey team to his family to just other members in the community itself. This book is very emotional. I do want to say trigger warning for sexual violence, and also just the aftermath where you see a town kind of divide itself in half, some of them choosing hockey and others choosing the side of justice. This book is also a character study on a lot of young individuals kind of on the precipice of major changes in their life, coming of age, growing up, choosing parts of themselves that they want to see flourish and hiding others. It is really emotional, but it is really well written, and Frederick Bachman's characters just feel so lifelike, and his writing style just keeps you completely invested in the book while you're reading it. Next up is a book that made you happy, and this is a very recent read, but I loved this book. I am obsessed with this book, addicted to this book while reading it, and that is The Beautiful Ones by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Delightful. This book is romantic and emotional and sweeping. The melodrama, if you love historical romance that also is just super well written, has that sort of intensity of will they, won't they, brushing hands, like all of that, this is the book for you. I love historical romance, and this is one of the best historical romances I have read in years, and I wasn't even anticipating it when I picked this book up. But this is a multi-POV story, but primarily we're following one of our main characters, Nina, and she is just about to debut in society, and she's really nervous about it. She is staying with her very beautiful and very wealthy older cousin-in-law, and she really wants to become part of this group called the Beautiful Ones, but she's already kind of at the center of a lot of gossip because she has telekinetic powers, which makes her appear kind of clumsy. She's also from the countryside, so she's not very well bred, if you will. But at the beginning of the story, she meets a man named Hector, and she's immediately dazzled by him, not only because he is a performer and a great telekinetic individual himself, and he's willing to train her, but he's handsome, he's mysterious, but he is hiding a secret, and it is not a small secret. That secret is he was in love with Nina's older cousin-in-law, Valerie, 10 years ago. So begins one of the most dramatic and messy tales that's not annoying. Like, you end up falling in love with Nina and even Hector and just rooting for love and romance, and there's so much drama and intensity to keep you hooked along the way. Not to mention, it has all the trappings of a great historical romance, from the propriety and the society setting, from the dresses to the little walks to the gatherings to city settings to country settings. It's so much fun. I want this to be turned into a movie right away, or a TV show. The drama in this, I could not put it down. I loved this book. It delighted me. It dazzled me. I'm obsessed with it. Alrighty, friends, we are in the home stretch, I promise. The next question is, what is the most beautiful book you have bought this year? Again, as someone who buys a lot of books, I have a few to show off. First is Beasts of a Little Land by Joo-Hae Kim. I just love the illustrated cover. This is also a sweeping historical saga, and I feel like it just matches the story so well, especially with this illustration of a tiger. It's beautiful. I love it. And it also caught my eye at the bookstore and made me buy it. Next, I have Mrs. Death, Mrs. Death. And this is just another stunning illustrated cover. I love the contrasting colors. I love the title. I love the mirroring, and I love the wolf and the rabbit. Another book that I really feel like just matches the vibe of the story perfectly. It's moody, it's mysterious, it's fantastic. And then lastly, The Mysterious Benedict Society. I love how fun, but also a little retro this is. Looking at this cover just makes me nostalgic. It feels like a beautiful illustration in the children's books that I grew up reading. Obviously, this is a children's book I grew up reading, so I'm just excited that it kind of kept the same vibe that I personally associate with it. I think it's so cute. Like, I would have this as a print in my house. I love how playful and I just love it. I look at it and it charms me. The very last question is, what are some books that you need to read before the end of this year? And once again, I have a few. The first is The Last Arguments of Kings by Joe Abercrombie. This is the third and final book to the First Law trilogy. Again, I loved the sequel. I need to continue on. If anything, I feel like I have taken too long between books 2 and 3. So I should for sure get to this soon, and then I can carry on with more Joe Abercrombie books. I love when there's a whole universe to explore. And I also have The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. This is on my June TBR, and I really hope to get to this month. I also just want to challenge myself in general to continue to pick up more literary fiction, because truly every time I do, I always really enjoy it. It's a book that's for sure on my TBR, and I also have an inkling it could be a new favorite. And the last is a new release I just haven't gotten to yet, and that is Sea of Tranquility by Emily St. John Mandel. I am a huge fan of Emily St. John Mandel, from Station 11 to The Glass Hotel, and this is her newest release. And the fun thing about her books is that they're all kind of connected. I believe this is also set on Vancouver Island. It really utilizes Emily St. John Mandel's style of having all these disparate point of views, and she connects them all together in this larger tapestry of experience. I'm really hoping I love this. I'm curious to see what I think, and I also hope to get to this year as well. Alrighty guys, that is the mid-year book freakout tag. Let me know down below some of your favorite reads you've had so far this year, as I would love to know, and I will see you soon with another video soon. Goodbye.